Hello, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be. I will be commenting on Andrew's paper. Let me just give you what we are going to do in this session. The session is expected to last 45 minutes. We will start with a bit of introductions, and then we will hear Andrew for 15 minutes. But I think you can go a bit overboard if you want. And then we will have 12 minutes for an open Q&A. And so this is part of sessions that we are organizing. Some of the selected papers, they have been selected for Informal Logic Journal, and one of them is Andrew's paper. I think after us, Dr. Karim Sadık and Dr. Nadia will be doing the same thing for Karim Sadık's paper. So to be honest, I didn't know that I should have introduced Andrew, so I'm going to ask Andrew to introduce himself for our audience first, and then we will start with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Rahmi. So yes, I'm Andrew Aberdein. I teach at Florida Institute of Technology. I'm probably best known for work on virtue argumentation, of which this is a piece. So let me see if I can. Yes, there we go. So let me. Okay. So. Right, so I want to say, that is, yeah, very live. So I want to say something about a specific topic related to debate and also related to virtual argumentation. So concerned with the role of propositions which the arguer doesn't endorse, but which the arguer ends up arguing for or arguing from anyway, which is something that pops up more often than perhaps you might think. So in particular, it's sort of associated with several kind of classic patterns of argumentation, classic enough that they've all got, well, with a bit of a stretch, Latin names, which is what we've got in the keywords down there. So in alphabetical order, I will actually deal with them in a different order, but the ex concessus, the ex hypothesi, advocatio diaboli, well, devil's advocate, and in utramque partem, so from multiple sides. So this is was my original abstract. And yeah, I won't say much about the first two of those, the ex concessus and the ex hypothesi. I mean, they're in the full-length paper, but in the interest of time, I think they present relatively limited problems. So the ex concessus is what's sometimes called Lockean ad hominem, so sort of ad hominem in the old-fashioned John Locke sense of an argument that proceeds from the other party's assumptions, which is generally fine, but it does mean that you might well be arguing in a way that, well, the other guy might think is convincing, but if you don't agree with his assumptions, is at least from your point of view potentially unsound. And indeed, ex hypothesi arguments from some hypothesis, which includes, reductio ad absurdum, where you're arguing from something that you expect to show to be false. So those are potentially present some sort of tension that you're assuming things that you expect to turn out to be false, but they're not really where the sharp edges of this problem lie. The devil's advocate problem, I think, presents a bit more of an issue. Partly it's an issue of definition. People have been talking about devil's advocacy more recently, perhaps. They've been talking about it more, and not always in the same way. So the original origin of this, which I suppose most people know, is this practice from the Catholic Church that when there is a candidate for sainthood, there should be somebody making the argument for the other side, the argument that this guy should not be canonized. popularly known as the devil's advocate. So you're advocating for the opposite side of the case, just, I suppose, so that it isn't a pushover that, you know, anyone nominated for sainthood just gets nodded through. They make sure that they challenge such candidacies. It's acquired more recent usage, I think, partly in the sort of management science literature. People started using this, and indeed there was sort of empirical research to support this approach, that it was helpful in decision-making to avoid groupthink. If there was somebody in the group who would adopt an unpopular position, even if maybe they didn't personally endorse it. And that leads us to this issue of supporting positions you don't necessarily endorse. I think the empirical literature here suggests that this goes better if the guy, the skeptic on your group, really does support this contrarian position. Right? He's not just play acting, but it's better than nothing to have somebody challenging this view. More recently, well, argumentation theorists have presented versions of this, and we can see some of these up here. So Aiken and Clanton, in one of the sort of early Virtue papers back in 2010, talk about a virtuous devil's advocate who expressly announces that they're not actually going to be presenting their own point of view, but somebody else's. So at least they're honest about it. They're not concealing their relationship to the position they're advancing. Then Katerina Stevens and Dan Cohen have this go further with the angelic devil's advocate, who is sort of an exemplar of a particular type of adversariality, what they regard as being the positive aspects of adversariality without the harmful aspects. On the other hand, you've got Tertullian and Corbelan in this recent paper in Philosophical Quarterly talking about diabolical devil's advocates. I think they're presenting their concern more with a usage of this term that's been sort of popularized in some online discourse, where people say, well, I'm just playing devil's advocate as a way of justifying their defense of some unpalatable position. The suspicion is they really do support it, but they're trying to distance themselves from it in a kind of bad faith way. So, I mean, that's actually kind of the opposite of what I'm talking about. So, strictly speaking, that paper is sort of outside the scope of this one. That was the devil's advocate. I got a little bit to say about that, but the thing that really caught my eye is this concept of, well, again, the sort of fancy Latin tag of in utramque partem, of arguing from multiple sides. And I think one of the things that sort of provoked my interest in this area was a paper by Tim Kenyon and Jennifer Saul, both based in Canada, but here writing about, well, both a British and an American example. I think they rather clumsily run together here. Of course, nowadays in American politics, you think of Johnson and Trump, you're thinking of Johnson, the Speaker of the House, but this is Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of the UK. And their criticism of, I mean, Boris Johnson can be justifiably criticised for lots of reasons, but their criticism struck me as unfair. Boris Johnson wrote one column in favour of Brexit and one column opposed. So he wrote but didn't publish, that is, and then decided at the last minute which one to publish and which side to back. It's generally accepted, weasel words, that this decision was based entirely on what he thought would serve his career best. This is not the action of a person with true convictions determined to argue for what he believes to be true, nor, however, is it the action of a deceptive character determined to conceal the truth and lead his readers into falsehood. Instead, it seems to be naturally characterized as the action of a bullshitter, someone who simply had no interest in truth or falsehood. All indications are that his focus was on nothing but political or possibly personal expediency. I mean, this struck me as unfair, because what it actually describes is something which sort of classical rhetoricians have been advising people to do for millennia, as a way of understanding an issue properly and understanding which side of it you support. So, and I mean, as it happens, you know, Boris Johnson is someone with a classics graduate who doesn't let people forget that he's a classics graduate. He often alludes to his classics degree from Balliol College, Oxford. So he presumably knows this. And indeed, well, here as an example, Cicero, if ever a person shall arise, you shall have abilities to deliver opinions on both sides of a question on all subjects, after the manner of Aristotle, and from a knowledge of the precepts of that philosopher to deliver 2 contradictory orations on every conceivable topic, or shall be able, after the manner of Arcesilas or Carneades, to dispute against every proposition that can be laid down, and shall unite with those powers that rhetorical skill and practice and exercise in speaking, he will be the true, the perfect, the only orator. So, well, that's quite an endorsement. John Locke, on the other hand, is sceptical about this sort of thing. It is not safe to play with error and dress it up to ourselves or others in the shape of truth. The mind, by degrees, loses its natural relish of real solid truth, is reconciled insensibly to anything that can but be dressed up into any faint appearance of it, and if the fancy be allowed the place of judgment at first in sport, it afterwards comes by use to usurp it. So I think Locke there representing a kind of departure from that sort of classical consensus. And we can find, I mean, this, as I started poking around, I discovered this sort of debate was rejoined in the 1950s. There's a lot of stuff out there. Partly the provocation for this was that one of the sort of intercollegiate debate competitions, which the US then as now, as US universities were keen on, and the proposition that they chose one year in the 1950s for sort of adoption across a sort of US-wide intercollegiate debate was that this House believes that the United States should recognize Red China. This was at a time when the US had diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but not with the People's Republic of China. So they'd backed the wrong China in the Chinese Civil War, and they didn't acknowledge that until the 70s. So in the 1950s, they were still backing the nationalist government in Taipei. And this was very controversial. Some of the military colleges refused to take part in this debate because they didn't want, the nature of this sort of intercollegiate debate is that you need to have somebody on both sides. You need to prepare both sides of the debate. The intercollegiate rules require that. The military colleges, and I think for some reason the teachers' colleges of the state of Illinois refused to participate in this, and then there was a debate that over many articles in the relevant sort of speech communication journals in the 1950s. Richard Murphy has a couple of articles attacking the prevailing practice of switch sides debating. So he has this paper in 1957, quite early in this controversy, and then he comes back again in 63. So I think I'll just look at the second of those quotes. In this controversy, so at this point he's kind of lost the argument because, I mean, by and large, the balance of the debate went in favor of switch sides debate, but he's kind of complaining about it. In this controversy, obviously the partisans work from different sets of values. One group believes debate to be an exercise in presenting arguments. The other group believes it should be an institution for exposing, clarifying, modifying, or intensifying belief and arriving at a judgment. One group holds debate to be an exercise in verbalization. The other maintains it as practical training in logical and persuasive speaking. One group describes debate as a school exercise, a part skill, role-playing. The other sees debate as a real art applicable in life. Well, you can see which side he thinks are the good guys. But the odd thing is that that actually, certainly if you look at that, the first of those contrasts there, that believes it should be an institution for exposing, clarifying, modifying, or intensifying belief and arriving at a judgment. I mean, that's what Murphy thinks, requiring people to defend their own convictions would do. But for Cicero, that's what requiring people to be able to defend either side does. That it's only by thoroughly setting out the arguments on both sides of the case that you, this sort of process of Ciceronian inventio, you come to properly understand what the debate looks like and understand your own position. So the sort of irony here is that Murphy arguably is providing quite a good description of the position that ostensibly he's denying. So I want to sort of move swiftly into how I connect this to virtue argumentation theory, and in particular, the sort of the connective tissue I think runs through this, the concept of adversariality, which has attracted quite a bit of attention in argumentation theory recently, particularly from some virtue theorists like Katerina Stevens, and well, she might deny that she's a virtue theorist, but Dan Cohen definitely is. So they have this fourfold distinction of different approaches to adversariality. So the adversarial attitude is the sort of pejorative aspect of adversarial conduct. So the sort of hostility and prejudicial attacks on the other side. So that's all the worst aspects of it. The adversarial stance is simply adopting an adversarial role in a more sort of ethically neutral, more benign way. So it's stripped of the actual sort of aggressive and unpleasant aspects of adversariality. The adversarial function is kind of pared down even more. That's just something that you're kind of stuck with if you have a debate where there's more than one side. And then even if you're even sort of even weaker concept is the persuasive adversarial effect. Even a debate where a sort of a passage of argumentation where there wasn't really two sides, you could still succeed in persuading somebody of the position that you're advancing. So in a completely sort of minimal way. So anyway, so that last one is we can perhaps set aside, but it's a matter of distinguishing the negative aspects of adversariality from the positive aspects, and therefore leaving space for there being a virtuous way of being adversarial. And of course, as we've seen, then Aiken and Clanton have already pointed in that direction. And we're starting to see a couple of virtues that we could link to the proper conduct of adversarial behavior. So for Aiken and Clanton, they associate this with sincerity. So deliberative sincerity is the virtue that when one asserts a position as one's own, it actually is one's own position, that one is not dissembling or bearing false witness for strictly strategic and non-epistemic purposes. But notice that they believe, as we saw earlier, that that's actually consistent with, for example, the devil's advocate, because the devil's advocate, a virtuous devil's advocate, would admit that that's what they're doing. They're not deceiving anyone as to where they actually stand, that they're open about it. And again, within the context of switch sides debate, in theory, I mean, it's obviously not good debating. Well, I assume it's not good debating practice to start off by saying I don't really believe any of this stuff. But within the general framing of the debate, there are ways of setting this up in a way that makes it clear that what it is that you're doing. That these are not people who have been chosen because of their particular convictions. These are people who've been assigned a position. And we can also see, going back to an even earlier source, so Richard Paul, who was writing about critical thinking dispositions, but basically critical thinking virtues, back in the 90s. 2000, but I think there are earlier versions of this paper. So he talks about intellectual good faith or integrity, recognition of the need to be true to one's own thinking, to be consistent in the intellectual standards one applies, to hold oneself to the same rigorous standards of evidence and proof to which one holds one's antagonists, to practice what one advocates for others, to honestly admit discrepancies and inconsistencies in one's own thought and action. So again, I think that these are virtues that one can adopt that have the potential to sort of mitigate the risks associated with arguing to or from positions that the arguer actually repudiates. So adopting the framework provided in the slides template. As research results, I can say that where I sort of end up with this is that virtuous arguers can indeed reason from premises or to conclusions they do not endorse, provided that they do so openly, and they don't seek to mislead the audience as to their true commitments. They must also be sure that whenever they represent a position they don't hold, they do so in a manner as faithful as possible to the views of the actual advocates of that position, that you're not sort of setting up a straw man here. And then, well, there are practical applications of this as well, so I have some recommendations in the context of debate. Competitive debate should be structured so as to improve, and certainly not to diminish, the argumentative virtues of its participants. That, I think, is sort of a general point about how I think where I think sort of an approach to the argumentative virtues should intersect with treatment of debate. If there is a virtuous way to reason from premises or to conclusions one does not endorse, it's reasonable to expect competitive debaters to exemplify this aspect of argumentative virtue as much as any other. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And it's a shame that we are only allocating only 15 minutes for this beautiful paper. Uh, I'm very happy to be commenting on this paper. While conducting the ADAB project, we aimed to turn traditional ADAB al-Bahth wal-Munazara into competitive debating model. And one of the issues that we needed to take into account was what is a prevalent organizational and institutional choice in debating, which is switch side debating. So we needed to determine whether the proponent and opponent roles should be decided arbitrarily, as almost all debating models do, or should the participants be assigned to positions that they are already committed to. And as part of the project, we had the chance to organize a symposium in Istanbul. Many participants, some of them are sitting here, some of them, and including Andrew, joined, and we discussed this issue. I'm glad that we continue this conversation now here. At the time, I was more inclined to the second option, that is, arguers should be assigned to positions that they are already committed to. I am still in the same opinion. However, this doesn't mean that I believe switch side debates are morally wrong or they are less virtuous. So as a principle, I have no problem with assigning positions arbitrarily, especially in terms of competitive debating. And I think in his paper, you will be reading soon in the Informal Logic special issue, hopefully, Andrew made a strong case for arguing from unendorsed claims, and he's not saying arguing from the positions you have are less virtuous, etc. So the argument he's making is very, I think, very clear cut. As a result, my commentary here will not be an adversarial one. I will not try to refute his arguments, but I will try to expand the discussion for the Q&A. And so we need to understand that the debated topic here is not whether switch side debates are intrinsically good or bad, but which institutional design will help the debaters more. And of course, based on different needs and contexts, it's completely reasonable to hear different answers. So now I will try to develop. I will try to make a case for the sake of being an angelic devil's advocate here, so that we can have a more lively discussion. I will try to make a case going to two traditions. I will first go to a double Bahth wal-Munazara tradition, and then I will go to the modern dialogue theory. So now in Munazara, what we see when we discuss the proponent and the opponent, the way that they defined so we have Sa'il, who is the questioner, and the way the Sa'il, the questioner, is defined is that in Arabic, man nasaba nafsahu li nafyi idda or mudda, who appointed his self to argue against a position. And the way the claimant muddi is defined is man nasaba nafsahu bi isbat al-hukmi bi dawa ebit tanbih, which translates into the claimant is a person who assigns himself to the positions of affirming the claim. Now, so what we see here, so here we see two arguers, one claimant and a questioner, who assign themselves to a position. But as you see, this doesn't mean necessarily that they need to believe in the positions they are assigning. They are taking roles, and in the example given by Murphy, role taking was something something that you need to be role playing. Role making is not a serious work. Serious people don't do this. But actually now we have our dear friend Katerina Stevens. She's going to publish her next book. Basically, she's arguing that argumentation theory should be all about role making and role playing, which I agree. So what's happening is that they are taking roles, the roles of the claimant and the questioner, on purpose, for the purpose of manifestation of truth. This is according to the Munazara theory. So, as a general principle, the Munazara tradition argues that it's not important from whose mouth truth is voiced. One can think that the Munazara tradition, in terms of design, has no problem with switch side debates. However, when it comes to arguing from commitments of your interlocutor or the ad hominem in the Lockean sense, things change. Accordingly, in a munazara, if one party argues from the concessions, commitments of the other party, munazara has lost its truth-seeking character. Now, we are talking about a different kind of animal, which doesn't mean it's a bad animal, but now we are in the domain of not munazara, but jadal. Now we are doing a debate. So this actually proves Walter's position that debates, competitive debates, can have a switch side debating. But for munazara scholars who were very much, at least theoretically, who were very much involved in the idea of truth seeking, they believed that arguing from, trying to convince or coerce the other party to your position is not what truth seekers do. And as Hitchcock says, as Aberdein talks about this, thus forcing the interlocutor either to accept the conclusion or retract a concession or to challenge the inference is not something you do in a munazara, because you are not interested in persuading the other party in a munazara, you are interested in the truth itself. So basing your own argument, while this is good, basing your argument on your own self and your commitments, while this is good in debate in the modern sense, it would not be good in the traditional truth-seeking sense of munazara. This is why, just because your interlocutor is committed to a premise or conclusion, according to munazara scholars, you are not doing munazara anymore. You are doing something else. You are doing debate, which might be done in a good way and a bad way. So you have good way of debate and bad ways. Nevertheless, we see that in munazara, interestingly, because truth should be impersonal, you can make the case that we need switch side debates because it's not important who is on which side, right? And similarly, for the same reason, because of the impersonality of truth, the debaters should not debate from commitments, concessions of the other party, because truth is not intersubjective. I don't know if I could make myself understood well, because truth needs to be impersonal, switch side debating is good. At the same time, because truth needs to be impersonal, you should not argue from the concessions, commitments, and therefore overall person of your interlocutor. This is the case that the munazara scholars, so basically what they are doing, they are making a divide between different types of dialogues. And they say in a munazara type of dialogue, you don't argue from concessions, but in a debate type of dialogue, you can do this. Now I switch to Walton and Krabbe. I hope I have some time. This might be contradictory at first, because in what happens is, they say they are interested in commitments, not in beliefs. They ask, Walton and Krabbe, they ask, what's a commitment in dialogue? Is it a state of mind? Is it an inference to be drawn from what you say and how you act when you are interacting with other people? They say the first answer is psychologism. We are not interested in the beliefs of other people. We are interested in externalizable social commitments. Theoretically then, it is not important to be your own person when debating. Your persona, which what Hamblin says, is created through your moves. However, the problem is that for Walton and Krabbe, they also talk about something they called dark side commitments. The commitments that might not be even known to you or to your interlocutor. Now, and when I say dark side commitments, it might not be very explainable, not understandable in the very sense, but our friend Dima Mohammed, she developed this idea of standing standpoints and argumentative associates. And basically, what I'm trying to say here is although you try to take away the person from the debate, the belief from the debate, words, positions, claims, premises, they have their own individual and social history. And let's say if you are going to say law and order is important when it comes to social upheaval, let's say, for some of you, this is, this person wants law and order. For some others, it is already associated with white American supremacist idea that has been used to subjugate the black African Americans and the brown people. So the premises and conclusions, they have their own histories, and it's not very easy to disidentify yourself or disassociate yourself from these commitments. Yeah, that's why I say when it comes to wouldn't be more helpful for debaters to actually try to uncover their own dark side commitments, try to understand in a nutshell, try to understand what you are and what the hell on earth you are actually saying. So as I said, this is not a rebuttal of Andrew, but this is something that we can discuss the issue of dark side commitments. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you want me to just say a couple of things in response. I mean, yeah. So yeah, thank you. That was helpful and supportive. Yeah, I think it was interesting in that. So I think like 3 points, maybe, if I can remember all 3 of them. So I think yeah, it's a slightly surprising point in a way that well, you are the Manazara expert. I am nothing of the kind. But interesting to learn that the Manazara tradition is skeptical of what struck me as being one of the more unproblematic aspects of this. And one of the reasons why it strikes me as being unproblematic is that sort of arguing from the commitments of the other party can actually be sort of represented in the context of formal dialogues that are actually equivalent to deductive logic. So in that sense, it ends up being entirely uncontroversial. But then that's something that's a long way removed from competitive debate. So in that application, then I can understand why this perhaps makes sense as a response. So that was one thought. I mean, the thing which struck me as being the more interesting, so there's like a second point, the thing which struck me as being a more sort of interesting avenue here, as I think I sort of gestured in presenting this, is the stuff on like what I was calling Ciceronian inventio, of using arguing from both sides as a way of understanding your own thoughts on an issue, of actually coming to clarify, to properly have an opinion, which perhaps at the start of the process you couldn't honestly say that you did. You had some sort of ill-formed thoughts, and then by kind of being forced or forcing yourself to find the best arguments for both sides, you come out with actually something much closer to a defensible opinion of it. That seems like a much more sort of meaty, thick sort of ethically engaged endeavor, and one that's more interesting to defend. A sort of final thought that some of your remarks reminded me of someone who's written a lot of interesting stuff about this is Sherman Clark. I'm not sure if you've come across Sherman Clark. He's a law professor in the US, somewhere in the Midwest. But he writes on a sort of virtue jurisprudence / virtue argumentation approach. One of the points that he makes is that when we engage in arguments, we are in part sort of shaping the moral world of the other parties to the argument, of the people we argue with, of the audience of that argument. And one of the reasons why we ought to be nervous about using sort of dubious methods is that even if we win the argument in the short run, if we end up making people morally worse, that's a price we shouldn't be paying. And that seems something that's even more applicable if we're it's not just one argument. If we're now advocating some particular practice to roll out across some program of competitive debate, we definitely don't want that to be making people morally worse. But so I think that's just a kind of a recommendation for a parallel line of inquiry. But thank you very much.
Thank you. As I said, this is just for the discussion. Now we can have some 10 minutes, I think, for a Q&A. Please, we are very happy to hear your questions. No time for this? What's happening? We don't have time. Why don't we have time?
Yeah, 4:40. We started about 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay. We can have 5 minutes, I think, still, please. Especially we have experienced debaters here. We have practitioners of different traditions of argumentation. We have Chinese scholars here. please, let's have.
Again, just a food for thought. I was thinking in that kind of, let's say, dialogue, like ideal kind of dialogue or position. You are imagining, isn't it? We need someone needs to imagine a kind of unencumbered selves or a kind of neutral position that's able to argue from both sides. But how can you embrace the idea that actually we are already embedded into certain positions, or we cannot be unencumbered. We are cumbered. We are already embedded. So even the play or the game, can we think of this kind of neutral, rational position without thinking of this? We are already embedded in certain values or all those things. What do you think? Just.
Well, yes, I take your point about us already. There isn't a neutral position here. I mean, I guess at least for the sort of examples which strike me as being worth saving out of this. I mean, I sort of presented this whole kind of mixed platter of different varieties of different bits of argumentation that involve claims that you don't endorse. But for where this is the ones where this is worth saving, then I guess my point would be that, well, yeah, you're not starting from a neutral, unencumbered position, but you're starting from a position where you're much less well informed, including about your own commitments. So that the process of constructing these arguments might be a means by which you create your own position. You sort of you assemble the position that you're ultimately going to end up endorsing. So yes, you're not starting from a completely blank slate, but you're starting from some very sort of preliminary draft, and then hopefully you're revising it in positive ways.
Maybe some more comments and questions, and maybe we can hear the questions and then discuss them afterwards when we finish the session.
Just a thought. So I'm somehow sympathetic to the what you might call the moral community perspective, that there is some kind of a disadvantage. We might not be able to assess it currently. However, I wonder if we make a distinction between, or maybe the literature does, devil's advocate or taking the other side in the public versus non-public. And it seems to me that if we're gonna, even no matter whatever kind of reason we have against it, it cannot include the non-public component, because this is just how our minds think. I mean, we just consider pros and cons in some sense. So it must be something that's more related to the public, but I wonder if the literature makes that distinction, one, and second, whether if they do, they say more about what makes it public. Is it the fact that I'm speaking in a conference like this? Do I have to be on TV? Do I have to be a government official? Things like that. Yeah.
Does competitive debate count as public or private? This is a good question, I think. I think we have some more. We can have some more questions and comments. Okay, we will hear your comments and questions and finish.
An exceptionally short and perhaps even irrelevant observation is that I find that this is a very important and pivotal discussion, right? We're exposing people to a certain set of stimuli and educational experiences that include putting them into a position where they argue for something that might not be good, might not be even something they agree with. It's a fascinating topic. Should a virtuous man play an evil man? Does that corrupt his nature, his soul, his morals? So from a debate practitioner's perspective, it's interesting to me that in my world at least, that never factored into the equation, right? That's never a discussion we had, which I think is good, right? Because at the end of the day, from a practitioner's perspective, it was all about logistics. If I have 100 debaters at a tournament, it was just starting to do the thing. So I was, from a logistical perspective, at a tournament, if I have 100 people, I need 50 pro and I need 50 contra. So it's kind of sad that perhaps we cannot accommodate it logistically, but at least having the discussion, I think, would be important.
Our session, it was unfortunately a bit, I think we need more time to discuss this issue theoretically and practice-wise, and I hope we get to do it in other sessions. Thank you very much, everybody. See you soon.
Okay.